The wedding dress hung like a ghost in the empty church, its ivory silk catching the late afternoon sun, streaming through stained glass windows. Sarah Mitchell stood frozen in the doorway, clutching a crumpled note in her trembling hand. The sanctuary that should have been filled with family and friends sat eerily silent, rows of white ribbons tied to empty pews, fluttering in the breeze from an open side door. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. He's gone, she whispered to herself, the words echoing off the vaulted ceiling. 3 hours before our wedding, and he's just gone. The note had been brief, cowardly in its simplicity. Can't do this. Sorry. Marcus, no explanation, no forwarding address, nothing but 26 years of her life suddenly reduced to 11 words scrawled on hotel stationery. Sarah's legs gave way, and she sank into the nearest pew, the wedding dress she'd never wear pooling around her like spilled cream. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from confused guests, the wedding coordinator, the caterer. She turned it off and sat in the gathering darkness alone with the weight of her shattered future. The mountain town of Cedar Falls, Colorado, had been Marcus's choice for their destination wedding. Romantic, he'd called it. Intimate. Now, it felt like a prison. When the church custodian found her 2 hours later, Sarah was still sitting there, mascara streaked down her cheeks, staring at nothing. "Miss, I need to lock up," the elderly man said gently. "You okay?" Sarah laughed, a broken sound that held no humor. "Do I look okay?" The man's weathered face softened with understanding. He'd probably seen enough heartbreak in his years tending to this little mountain church. "Where are you staying, honey? Someone coming to get you?" That's when the full scope of her situation hit her. The honeymoon suite was booked under Marcus's name. Her apartment back in Denver had been given up 2 weeks ago. Their belongings moved into Marcus's house, a house she now had no right to enter. Her job at the marketing firm had been left behind for what was supposed to be a fresh start in Marcus's hometown of Portland. Everything she'd built her life around had been dismantled in preparation for a future that no longer existed. "I don't know," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. The custodian sat beside her, his presence unexpectedly comforting. "You have a family?" Sarah shook her head. Her parents had died in a car accident 4 years ago, leaving her with no siblings, no extended family worth mentioning. Marcus had been her anchor, her security, her plan for the future. Without him, she was adrift. "Well," the man said after a moment, "Cedar Falls ain't the worst place to figure things out. People here look after each other. You need a place tonight. My wife and I got a spare room." The kindness of a stranger almost broke her completely. Sarah managed to thank him through fresh tears, but she couldn't bring herself to accept. She needed to think, to process, to figure out what came next. Instead, she found herself walking the empty streets of Cedar Falls as night settled over the mountain town. The Victorian-era buildings were charming in the way that mountain towns often were, with their gingerbread trim and welcoming porches. String lights twinkled in restaurant windows, and the sound of laughter drifted from a local tavern, normal people living normal lives, while her world had imploded. She ended up at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, nursing coffee that had long gone cold while she tried to make sense of her situation. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, kept refilling her cup without comment. It wasn't until nearly midnight that she finally spoke. "Honey, I've seen that look before. Whatever happened, sitting here feeling sorry for yourself ain't gonna fix it." Sarah looked up, surprised by the directness. "My fiancé left me at the altar today, literally 3 hours before the ceremony." The waitress whistled low. "That's a special kind of cruel. But you know what? Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us turns out to be the best thing in disguise." How could this possibly be a good thing? Sarah's voice cracked with exhaustion and despair. Maybe that man just saved you from making the biggest mistake of your life. Maybe he showed you his true colors before you were legally tied to him. Maybe, the waitress sat down across from her, you're finally free to become who you're supposed to be instead of who you thought you should be. The words hit deeper than Sarah expected. For months leading up to the wedding, she'd felt like she was sleepwalking through her own life. The dress Marcus had chosen, the venue he'd insisted on, the move to Portland that had never felt quite right. She'd been so focused on checking boxes, engagement, wedding, marriage, house in the suburbs, kids eventually, that she'd stopped asking herself what she actually wanted. I don't have anywhere to go, she admitted. No job, no home, no backup plan. I put everything into this wedding, this future with him. The waitress studied her with shrewd eyes. What's your name, sweetheart? Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. I'm Betty Carson, and I've been watching people figure out their lives in this diner for 23 years. You seem like a smart girl. What did you do for work? Marketing coordinator for a tech startup in Denver. I was good at it too. Creative. Campaigns, social media strategy, client relations. Talking about her professional skills felt strange after hours of feeling completely worthless. Betty nodded approvingly. Useful skills. Cedar Falls could use someone like that. We've got small businesses struggling to compete with the big chains down in the valley. Tourism industry that could be marketed better. You might be surprised what opportunities exist if you know where to look. The idea was so unexpected that Sarah almost laughed. Stay in Cedar Falls? The town where her humiliation had occurred, where everyone would know her as the woman who got abandoned at the altar? It seemed impossible. I can't stay here, she said. Everyone will know what happened. I'll be the object of pity everywhere I go. Or, Betty countered, you'll be the woman who was strong enough to start over. Mountain folks respect resilience, honey. We've all been through hard times up here. Weather, economic downturns, personal disasters. What matters is how you handle it. Betty glanced at the clock on the wall. Look, my shift ends in 10 minutes. I've got a small cabin about 5 miles up the mountain, belonging to my late husband's family. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and private. You can stay there tonight, get some real sleep and think things through. No charge, no strings attached. Sarah stared at her, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. Why would you help a complete stranger? Because someone helped me once when I needed it most. And because you remind me of myself at your age, lost, hurt, but with more strength than you realize. Betty stood up, pulling a set of keys from her apron pocket. Sometimes we all need a safe place to figure out what comes next. The cabin was exactly as Betty had described, simple but clean, with knotty pine walls and a stone fireplace that had been laid with wood, ready for lighting. Sarah found herself standing in the middle of the main room, still wearing her ruined wedding dress, trying to process how her life had changed so dramatically in the span of 12 hours. She found a bathroom with a shower, stripped off the dress, that now felt like a costume from someone else's life, and stood under the hot water until it ran cold. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel she'd found in a linen closet, she caught sight of herself in the mirror above the bathroom sink. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, not because her appearance had changed dramatically, but because something in her eyes was different. The constant anxiety she'd carried for months was gone, replaced by something harder to define. Fear, certainly, but also something that might have been relief. Sarah Mitchell, thank you for whatever you did to make sure I had wood for the fireplace and heat. Jake nodded once, economical with both words and gestures. Betty, called Lashi, dressed in the only clothes she had that weren't wedding-related, jeans and a sweater she'd packed for the rehearsal dinner. In the cabin's small kitchen, she found basic supplies and made herself tea, sitting at the wooden table by the window that looked out over the dark mountains. For the first time in hours, maybe months, Sarah allowed herself to really think about what she wanted. Not what Marcus wanted, not what her parents had expected before they died, not what society said she should want. What did Sarah Mitchell actually want from her life? The answer came slowly, like dawn breaking over the mountains. Outside, she wanted to feel useful, to build something meaningful, to live somewhere she could breathe without feeling like she was suffocating on other people's expectations. She wanted work that mattered, relationships that were genuine, a life that felt authentically hers. Maybe Betty was right. Maybe Cedar Falls wasn't the site of her humiliation, but the place where her real life could begin. The marketing skills that had served her well in Denver could certainly be applied to small mountain businesses. Tourism was clearly important. Here, she'd seen the ski resort signs, the hiking trail markers, the bed and breakfasts that seemed to cater to city folks looking for mountain escapes. As sleep finally claimed her in the unfamiliar bed, Sarah's last conscious thought was surprising in its clarity. Tomorrow, instead of dwelling on what she'd lost, she would start figuring out what she might gain. She woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize, and the distant sound of someone chopping wood. For a moment, disorientation clouded her thoughts before memory crashed back. The wedding that never was, Marcus's abandonment, Betty's unexpected kindness, and this cabin that had become her temporary refuge. Sarah dressed quickly and stepped outside, breathing in mountain air so crisp and clean it made her chest ache. The view that had been hidden by darkness the night before was breathtaking, rolling foothills covered in aspen and pine stretching towards snow-capped peaks that seemed to touch the sky. The chopping sound was coming from behind the cabin, where she found a man splitting logs with methodical precision. He was tall and lean, probably in his early 40s, with graying brown hair and the kind of weathered tan that came from years of outdoor work. When he looked up and saw her, his expression was carefully neutral. "You must be Betty's guest," he said, setting down his axe. "I'm Jake Coleman. I will keep an eye on this place for her. At night. Said you might need some space to think." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There was something about his manner that suggested he understood the need for solitude, for a place to process life's unexpected turns. Sarah found herself studying his face, noting the lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. The careful way he held himself like someone who'd learned to be self-reliant. "Are you from Cedar Falls?" she asked, partly from curiosity and partly because something about his presence was oddly comforting. "Close enough. I've got a place further up the mountain." He gestured vaguely toward the higher elevations. "Work. Keeps me in town most days, but I like the quiet up here." "What kind of work?" For a moment she thought he might not answer. Then, "Sheriff's Department." "Deputy sheriff, technically, but Sheriff Martinez is getting ready to retire, and the department's small enough that we all wear multiple hats. A law enforcement officer." That explained the alertness in his eyes, the way he seemed to catalogue everything around him without being obvious about it. Sarah had always been good at reading people. It had served her well in marketing, and something about Jake Coleman suggested depth beneath the surface. "I should let you get back to your thinking," Jake said, picking up his axe again. "Betty said you might stay a few days while you sort things out. Is that okay? I mean, I don't want to impose if this is your property or it's Betty's cabin. Her decision is who stays here." He paused, studying her with grey eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. "But for what it's worth, sometimes getting lost is the only way to find where you belong." The comment was unexpectedly profound, coming from a man who seemed to choose his words carefully. Before Sarah could respond, Jake had returned to his wood-splitting, each swing of the axe precise and powerful. She spent the morning exploring the immediate area around the cabin, marveling at how different the world looked from this elevation. The air was thinner, cleaner, carrying scents of pine and wildflowers that made her feel more alert than she had in months. A small stream ran behind the property, its water so clear she could see smooth stones on the bottom. When her stomach reminded her she hadn't eaten since yesterday's abandoned wedding breakfast, Sarah drove into town in her rental car, realizing she needed to figure out the practical aspects of her situation. Her credit card still worked, and she had enough in her personal savings account to last several weeks if she was careful. But at some point, she would need to make real decisions about her future. Cedar Falls looked different in daylight, less like a place of exile and more like a functioning community. The main street was lined with locally owned businesses, a hardware store, a bookshop, several restaurants, and what appeared to be a thriving outdoor gear shop. People moved with the unhurried pace of those who weren't racing against urban deadlines. She ended up back at Betty's diner for lunch, partly because it was familiar and partly because she found herself curious about the woman who had shown such unexpected kindness to a stranger. "How'd you sleep?" Betty asked, sliding a menu across the counter. "Better than I expected. Your friend Jake seems nice. Quiet, but nice." Betty's eyebrows rose slightly. "Jake Coleman talked to you?" "That's something. He's not what you'd call social these days." "Why not?" Betty glanced around the nearly empty diner, then leaned closer. "Lost his wife about 3 years ago. Cancer. They'd been together since high school, and her death just about broke him. He threw himself into work after that, took the deputy position here because he needed a fresh start somewhere. Nobody knew his story." Sarah felt a stab of recognition, the pain of loss, the need to escape reminders of what used to be. "That's awful. I'm sorry. He's a good man who's been dealt some hard blows. Probably why he understood when Betty told him about your situation. Recognizes a fellow traveler in the land of starting over." The phrase stuck with Sarah as she ate her lunch and wandered through town afterward. Starting over. It sounded both terrifying and liberating. In Denver, her life had been carefully structured around routines and expectations. Here, she could be anyone, do anything, become whatever version of herself felt most authentic. As afternoon turned to evening, she found herself drawn to the outdoor gear shop she'd noticed earlier. The owner, an energetic woman in her 30s, with sun-streaked hair and an infectious smile, introduced herself as Maria Santos. "You're new in town," Maria observed. It wasn't a question. "Very new. Just trying to figure out if I want to stay or keep moving." Maria's eyes lit up with interest. "What kind of work do you do?" "Marketing, mostly digital strategy and campaign development." Sarah was surprised by how easily the professional confidence returned when she talked about her skills. "No, kidding. You know, half the businesses in Cedar Falls are struggling because they don't know how to reach customers beyond our immediate area. The internet's supposed to be this great equalizer, but most of the older business owners don't know where to start." It was exactly what Betty had suggested the night before. Sarah found herself asking questions about the local business community, learning about the challenges and opportunities facing a small mountain town trying to compete in an increasingly connected world. By the time she returned to the cabin that evening, her mind was buzzing with possibilities. Jake's truck was parked nearby, and she could see light in the windows, suggesting he'd built up the fire for her return. She found him on the front porch, sitting in an old wooden chair and looking out at the mountains. Without the work clothes and the axe, he seemed more approachable, though still carrying that air of careful self-containment. "How was your first day as a Cedar Falls resident?" he asked. "I'm not a resident yet. I'm just visiting." "Uh-huh." His tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by her qualifier. "And how was your visit?" Sarah sat down in the other chair, surprised by how natural it felt to share the evening quiet with this almost stranger. Interesting. I met Maria Santos at the gear shop. She thinks the local business community could use some marketing help. Maria's not wrong. This town's got a lot to offer, but we're not great at telling people about it. We? Sarah caught the pronoun. How long have you lived here? 3 years. Long enough to feel invested in seeing it succeed. 3 years, the same time frame Betty had mentioned for his wife's death. Sarah found herself wondering if Jake had chosen Cedar Falls the same way she was considering it, as a place to rebuild. After everything fell apart, can I ask you something? She wasn't sure where the question was coming from, but it felt important. Do you ever regret starting over here, leaving whatever life you had before? Jake was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than bitter. Starting over isn't the same as leaving the past behind. You bring who you are with you wherever you go. But sometimes, a new place gives you room to grow into who you're supposed to become next. The insight was profound in its simplicity, and Sarah found herself nodding slowly. She wasn't running away from her old life so much as running towards something she couldn't yet define. The cabin's yours as long as you need it, Jake said, standing to leave. Betty's orders, but I agree with them. Sometimes we all need a safe place to figure things out. As his truck disappeared down the mountain road, Sarah remained on the porch, watching stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. For the first time since Marcus had walked out of her life, she felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sarah was drinking coffee on the cabin's front porch when a dusty pickup truck pulled into the clearing, and a woman in her 60s climbed out with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to taking charge. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her clothes suggested she'd come straight from some kind of outdoor work. "You must be Sarah," the woman called out, approaching with an outstretched hand. "I'm Dorothy Martinez, sheriff of this fine county and Jake's. Boss, Betty Carson told me you might be sticking around for a while." Sarah shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and the direct gaze that seemed to assess everything at once. "Nice to meet you. I'm not sure how long I'll be staying, though." "That's what Jake said you'd say." Dorothy grinned, settling herself into the second porch chair without invitation. "Mind if I sit? Been on my feet since 5 this morning dealing with a situation down in the valley." "Of course. Can I get you some coffee?" "That'd be appreciated." When Sarah returned with a fresh mug, Dorothy was studying the mountain vista with the expression of someone who never tired of the view. "Beautiful country up here. Jake picked a good spot to hole up and lick his wounds." The comment was clearly intended to probe for Sarah's knowledge of Jake's situation. Betty mentioned he'd been through some hard times. Hardest kind. But that's his story to tell, not mine. Dorothy sipped her coffee appreciatively. "What I came to talk about is a proposition. Have you ever considered working in law enforcement?" Sarah nearly choked on her coffee. "I'm sorry, what?" "Not as a deputy," Dorothy clarified with amusement. "Though you might make a good one eventually. No, I'm talking about something more in line with your background. See, our department's been trying to modernize for years, but we're all old. Dogs who don't know much about new tricks. What kind of modernization?" Dorothy pulled out her phone, an older model that looked like it had seen better days. "Community outreach, social media presence, public information campaigns. We've got a county website that looks like it was designed in 1995, and our idea of public relations is putting notices in the local newspaper that half the county doesn't read anymore." Sarah found herself leaning forward with interest. "You want to hire a marketing consultant. I want to hire someone who can help us connect with the community we serve. Young families moving up here from Denver and Colorado Springs, tourists who need to know about mountain safety, local businesses that could benefit from better coordination with law enforcement for events and emergencies. The proposal was unexpected, but intriguing. Sarah had always been drawn to work that felt meaningful, and helping a small-town sheriff's department serve its community better certainly qualified. "What's the budget for something like that?" she asked, her practical side. "Engaging. Modest but fair. County commissioners approve funding for a part-time community liaison position. Enough to live on if you don't have expensive tastes, and the work would be varied enough to keep things interesting." Dorothy stood up, finishing her coffee. "Think about it. Jake speaks highly of your insights, and Betty says you've got the kind of energy this place could use. We're not looking for someone to come in and change everything overnight, just someone who can help us do what we're already doing a little bit better." After Dorothy left, Sarah found herself pacing the cabin's small interior, mind racing with possibilities. A job opportunity in Cedar Falls would solve her immediate practical problems while giving her time to figure out her longer-term future. More importantly, it felt like meaningful work, the kind that could make a real difference in people's lives. She was still processing the offer when Jake appeared around midday, carrying a toolbox and wearing his deputy uniform. Dorothy said, "She made you a job offer. News travels fast in a small town. Faster than you'd think, so what do you think about it?" Sarah studied his face, looking for some indication of his opinion. "Honestly, it sounds interesting, but I'm not sure I'm ready to make that kind of commitment. A week ago, I was planning to move to Portland and be someone's wife. Now I'm considering staying in a town where I know maybe 5 people and starting over completely." Jake set down his toolbox and began examining the cabin's front steps, apparently finding some maintenance issue that needed attention. "Can I tell you something about starting over? Please. The hardest part isn't figuring out what you want to do next. It's trusting yourself enough to believe you can do it." He tested one of the steps, finding it slightly loose. "When I came here 3 years ago, I was convinced I was broken beyond repair. Dorothy took a chance on hiring me anyway, and it turned out I still knew how to be useful, even when everything else felt impossible." Sarah watched him work, noting the careful way he approached each task. "Do you think I should take the job? I think you should trust your instincts. They're probably better than you think." He glanced up from his work. "But if you're asking for my opinion, Dorothy doesn't make offers lightly. She sees something in you that she thinks the community needs." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of another vehicle approaching. This time, it was a bright red sedan that looked distinctly out of place on the mountain road. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the driver, her former colleague and supposed best friend, Jennifer Walsh, climbing out in designer hiking boots that had clearly never seen actual hiking. "Sarah! Oh my God, I've been looking everywhere for you." Jennifer rushed forward with the kind of dramatic concern that always made Sarah uncomfortable. "When Marcus told us what happened, we were all so worried." The mention of Marcus sent a spike of anger through Sarah. "Marcus told you what happened. What exactly did he say?" Jennifer's expression shifted, becoming carefully sympathetic. I said you had cold feet and ran away before the ceremony. He's been worried sick, Sarah. He thinks maybe you had some kind of breakdown." Sarah felt Jake's attention sharpen, though he continued working on the steps without comment. She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Marcus left me at the altar, Jennifer. He walked out 3 hours before our wedding with nothing but a note. I didn't have cold feet or a breakdown. I was abandoned." "That's not..." "Sarah, that's not what he told anyone. He said you disappeared, that your dress was gone from the bridal suite and no one could find you." The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Marcus had not only destroyed her life, but was now rewriting history to make himself the victim. Sarah felt a cold fury building in her chest. He's lying, she said flatly. I have the note he left me. I have a dozen witnesses who can confirm he never showed up for the ceremony. Jennifer's carefully composed expression began to crack. Sarah, maybe you're confused. You've been through a trauma. I've been through a betrayal, Sarah corrected. And apparently it's continuing. Why are you really here, Jen? Marcus asked me to find you. He wants to talk, to work things out. He realizes he made a mistake. Stop. Sarah held up a hand, feeling Jake's presence like a steadying force behind her. Just stop. Marcus made his choice, and now I'm making mine. I'm not going back to Denver, I'm not talking to him, and I'm not interested in working things out with someone who abandoned me and then lied about it. Jennifer's mask finally slipped completely, revealing something calculating underneath. You're being ridiculous, Sarah. You can't just throw away everything you've built because of one fight. One fight? Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. He left me at the altar and then told everyone I was the one who ran away. That's not a fight, that's character assassination. You're not thinking clearly. You're isolated up here, probably. Not eating properly. Maybe not taking care of yourself. You need to come home where people can look after you. The condescension in Jennifer's tone was the final straw. Sarah stepped forward, her voice deadly quiet. I am home, for the first time in years. I'm exactly where I need to be. And you can tell Marcus that if he wants to spin fairy tales about what happened, he can do it without my participation. Jennifer's eyes flicked to Jake, who had straightened from his work and was now openly watching the exchange. Who's this? Sarah, you can't just shack up with some random man you met. That's enough. Jake's voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable authority. Ma'am, I think it's time for you to leave. And you are? Jennifer's tone turned sharp. Deputy Sheriff Jake Coleman, and this is private property. He showed his badge briefly. The lady has made her position clear. Jennifer looked between them, clearly frustrated that her mission had failed so spectacularly. This isn't over, Sarah. Marcus isn't going to just give up. Then Marcus is going to be disappointed. Sarah crossed her arms. Goodbye, Jennifer. After Jennifer's car disappeared down the mountain road, Sarah sank into one of the porch chairs, adrenaline leaving her shaky. I can't believe he told people I ran away. I can't believe I was friends with someone who would come here and try to gaslight me into going back to him. Jake finished securing the loose step and sat down beside her. Some people can't handle the truth when it makes them look bad. They rewrite history to protect their image. Have you seen that before? More than I'd like. Part of the job is learning to recognize when someone's lying, and your friend, former friend, didn't come here to check on your welfare. She came here to manipulate you into going back. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude for his clear-eyed assessment. Thank you for backing me up. You didn't have to get involved. Yes, I did. His gray eyes met hers steadily. That's what neighbors do for each other up here. We look out for one another. The simple statement carried more weight than Sarah expected. In Denver, she'd barely known her neighbors' names. Here, after less than a week, she had people willing to stand up for her against someone trying to manipulate her back into a destructive situation. I'm going to take Dorothy's job offer, she said suddenly, the decision crystallizing in the aftermath of Jennifer's visit. If it's still available. Jake smiled, the first completely unguarded expression she'd seen from him. I think that's the right choice. Want me to call Dorothy and let her know? I'll call her myself. But first, I need to deal with some practical things. Sarah pulled out her phone, which she'd been avoiding since arriving in Cedar Falls. I need to officially resign from my job in Denver, figure out what to do about my belongings, and probably find a lawyer. Why a lawyer? Because I have a feeling Marcus isn't going to let this go quietly, and I want to be prepared. She scrolled through her contacts, steeling herself for difficult conversations. Jennifer was right about one thing. Marcus doesn't give up easily when he doesn't get his way. Jake's expression grew thoughtful. You think he might cause problems? I think someone who abandons his fiancée and then lies about it to everyone they know is capable of a lot of things. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. And I think I need to be ready for whatever comes next. The afternoon passed in a blur of phone calls and difficult conversations. Sarah's resignation from her Denver job was accepted with professional regret, but understanding. Her boss had heard about the wedding disaster through the industry grapevine and was sympathetic to her need for a fresh start. Dealing with her belongings proved more complicated. Everything she owned was in Marcus's house, and she had no desire to face him to retrieve it. After several calls, she arranged for a moving company to pack and ship her personal items to a storage unit in Cedar Falls, giving her time to figure out permanent housing. The lawyer consultation was enlightening and disturbing. Based on Sarah's description of events, the attorney suggested documenting everything. The original abandonment, Marcus's lies to their mutual friends, and any future contact attempts. Controlling behavior often escalates when the person loses. Control, the lawyer warned. Better to have a paper trail if you need it later. By evening, Sarah felt emotionally drained but oddly empowered. For the first time since Marcus had walked out of her life, she was taking active steps to build something new rather than simply reacting to what had been done to her. Jake returned as she was finishing her last phone call, carrying grocery bags and wearing civilian clothes that made him seem younger and more approachable. Thought you might be too busy to get to the store, he said, unpacking supplies in the cabin's small kitchen. Nothing fancy, just basics to keep you fed while you're dealing with all this. The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught Sarah off guard. You didn't have to do that. I know, but I wanted to. He began putting away groceries with the efficiency of someone accustomed to taking care of himself. How did the phone calls go, Sarah? Filled him in on the day's progress, noting how he listened with the focused attention of someone trained to gather and process information. When she mentioned the lawyer's warning about escalating behavior, his expression grew serious. That matches what I've seen in domestic situations, he said. Not saying this will escalate to that level, but it's smart to be prepared. Have you dealt with a lot of domestic cases? Enough to know that people who seem charming and successful in public can be very different in private. And people who rewrite history to make themselves look better often have practice at manipulation. Sarah shivered, remembering moments during her relationship with Marcus when she'd felt confused about her own perceptions of events. Had he been rewriting their history all along? Hey, Jake's voice was gentle. You got away before it got worse. Trust your instincts. They brought you here, and that was exactly the right choice. As darkness settled over the mountains, they found themselves sharing an impromptu dinner that Jake had somehow assembled from the groceries he'd brought. Nothing elaborate, pasta with vegetables and a simple salad, but it felt more genuine than any of the expensive restaurant meals she'd shared with Marcus. Can I ask you something? Sarah said as they finished eating. Why are you being so kind to me? I mean, I'm grateful, but I'm also curious. Jake was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. When my wife died, I thought my life was over. I was angry at the world, angry at God, angry at myself for not being able to save her. I came here planning to disappear, to just exist quietly until existing got too hard. Sarah held her breath, sensing he was sharing something he rarely talked about. Dorothy and Betty and a few other people refused to let me disappear. They didn't try to fix me or rush me through grief, but they made sure I knew I wasn't alone. They gave me space to heal and work to keep my hands busy and a community to belong to when I was ready. He met her eyes across the small table. Maybe I'm just paying it forward, or maybe I recognize something in you that reminds me of myself. 3 years ago, someone stronger than they know, just needing time and space to figure out what comes next. The insight was profound and deeply moving. Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes, not from sadness, but from the unexpected gift of being truly seen and understood. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For the job recommendation, for standing up to Jennifer, for the groceries, for seeing something in me worth helping." The strength was already there, Jake said simply. "Sometimes we all just need someone to remind us of what we're capable of." As they cleaned up dinner together, Sarah realized something fundamental had shifted. The terror and despair that had consumed her since Marcus's betrayal was being replaced by something she hadn't expected: excitement about the future. Not because she had all the answers, but because for the first time in years she felt free to find them. Sarah's first week as Cedar Falls community liaison proved more challenging and rewarding than she'd anticipated. Sheriff Martinez had arranged a small office space in the county building, complete with a computer that was only slightly newer than the department's website. The filing cabinets were stuffed with decades of reports, community event permits, and correspondence that seemed to have no organizational system whatsoever. The previous sheriff believed in paper trails, Dorothy explained on Sarah's first day, gesturing at the chaos. Unfortunately, he didn't believe in filing systems. "Consider this your first project. Figure out what we've got and how to make it useful." Sarah dove into the work with enthusiasm she hadn't felt in months. As she sorted through the accumulated records, patterns began to emerge. Cedar Falls had a rich history of community events, outdoor education programs, and public safety initiatives that had been poorly documented and even more poorly promoted. Hidden in the chaos were gems, successful programs that had been discontinued due to lack of participation, partnerships with local businesses that had dissolved for want of communication, and evidence of a community that cared deeply about its members but struggled to coordinate effectively. By Thursday, she'd created a basic database of community resources and was working on a social media strategy when her concentration was broken by raised voices in the main office. Through her open door, she could see a tall man in an expensive suit arguing with Dorothy, while Jake stood nearby, his posture alert but controlled. "I don't care about your jurisdictional limitations," the man was saying, his voice carrying the entitled tone of someone accustomed to getting his way. "My fiancée is missing, and I have reason to believe she's being held against her will in this county." Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the voice. Marcus. Somehow he'd found her. "Sir, as I've explained," Dorothy replied with professional patience, "we've conducted a welfare check on the individual in question. She's an adult woman who chose to relocate to our county of her own free will. There's no evidence of foul play or coercion." "You talked to her for 5 minutes," Marcus snapped. "Sarah's been through a traumatic experience. She's not thinking clearly. She needs professional help, not to be enabled by people who don't understand her condition." Sarah found herself standing without conscious decision, fury overriding caution. She walked into the main office, noting how Marcus's expression shifted from aggressive determination to calculated concern when he saw her. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I hear you're concerned about my welfare." "Sarah!" He stepped toward her, arms outstretched as if to embrace her. "Thank God you're safe. When Jennifer told me where you were, I came as soon as I could." Sarah stepped back, keeping distance between them. "I'm fine, as Sheriff Martinez already told you. What I'm not is your fiancé. That ended when you walked out 3 hours before our wedding." Marcus's mask of concern flickered. "Sweetheart, I know you're hurt. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but running away and hiding in the mountains isn't the answer. We can work through this together." There is no we, Marcus. You made that clear when you chose to abandon me rather than have an adult conversation about your doubts. I panicked, Marcus said, his voice taking on the persuasive tone she remembered from his sales presentations. Cold feet hit me like a freight train, and I handled it badly. But that doesn't mean what we had wasn't real. 3 years together, Sarah, that has to count for something. Sarah was aware of Dorothy and Jake watching the exchange, ready to intervene, if necessary, but also allowing her to handle the situation herself. The support gave her strength to stand her ground. What we had was you making decisions for both of us while I went along to keep the peace, she said. The wedding venue you chose, the honeymoon you planned, the move to Portland that I never really wanted. I was so focused on being the perfect girlfriend that I forgot to ask myself if I was happy. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You were happy. You said yes to everything. I said yes because I thought that's what love looked like. Compromise and accommodation. I didn't realize until you left that what I was doing wasn't compromise, it was self-erasure. That's ridiculous. Marcus's tone grew sharper. You're being dramatic, Sarah. This mountain air is obviously affecting your judgment. The condescension in his voice triggered something Sarah had been suppressing for months, the memory of countless conversations where her feelings had been dismissed as overreaction or misunderstanding. My judgment is fine, she said firmly. Better than it's been in years, actually. I'm not coming back to Denver, Marcus. I'm not coming back to you. Move on. Marcus looked around the office, his gaze lingering on Jake with obvious calculation. I see what this is about. You've gotten involved with someone else. That explains the sudden personality change. This has nothing to do with anyone else, Sarah said, though she felt Jake tense beside her. This is about me finally understanding what I want from my life, and it's not a relationship built on manipulation and control. Control? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sarah, I gave you everything, a beautiful home, financial security, a future. You gave me your version of everything. You never asked what I wanted. Because you never knew what you wanted. Marcus's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. You were drifting through life with no direction, no ambition beyond your little marketing job. I gave you purpose, structure, and a plan for the future. The words hit like physical blows, not because they were true, but because they revealed how Marcus had actually seen her throughout their relationship. Not as a partner, but as a project to be managed and improved. That's enough, Jake said quietly, stepping forward. The movement was subtle, but unmistakably protective. Marcus turned his attention to Jake with predatory focus. And you are? Deputy Sheriff Coleman, the one who conducted the welfare check Sheriff Martinez mentioned. Ah. Marcus's smile was sharp and unpleasant. The local hero who swooped in to rescue the damsel in distress. How convenient. Mr. Brennan, Dorothy interjected, her voice carrying clear warning. You've been told that Ms. Mitchell is here voluntarily and is in no danger. You've spoken with her directly and confirmed her well-being. Your concern has been addressed. My concern, Marcus said, his mask of civility slipping further, is that Sarah is making life-altering decisions while she's clearly in an unstable mental state. She's thrown away her career, her home, her support system to play house in the wilderness with strangers. I've started a new career, Sarah corrected. I've found a new home, and I've discovered what real support looks like. People who respect my choices instead of trying to manipulate me into compliance. Marcus's face flushed with anger. You think these people actually care about you? You're a novelty to them. Sarah, something broken they can fix to make themselves feel important. When the novelty wears off, you'll be alone in the middle of nowhere with nothing. The cruelty of the attack was breathtaking. Sarah felt as if she'd been slapped, not just by the words, but by the realization that this was how Marcus truly saw her as something broken that needed fixing. Time to go, Jake said, his voice carrying unmistakable authority. Now. Marcus straightened his suit jacket, his composure returning as quickly as it had vanished. This isn't over, Sarah. You can't just throw away 3 years because you're having some kind of midlife crisis at 26. Watch me, Sarah said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. After Marcus left, the office felt like a battlefield. In the aftermath of war, Sarah sank into a chair, adrenaline leaving her shaky and nauseated. "You okay?" Dorothy asked, her tough exterior softened with concern. "I think so. I'm sorry you had to witness that. I had no idea he would show up here." "Nothing to apologize for," Dorothy said firmly. "You handled yourself well. Set clear boundaries. Don't let him manipulate you into doubting yourself." Jake was standing by the window watching the parking lot. He's not leaving. Been sitting in his car for 10 minutes. Sarah joined him at the window, seeing Marcus's rental car parked across the street. Even at this distance, she could see him on his phone, probably calling Jennifer or someone else to report on his failed mission. "Is there anything legal you can do?" Sarah asked Dorothy. "About him harassing me?" "Not yet. He hasn't made any threats, hasn't violated any laws. But if he continues to pursue contact after you've made your position clear, we might have grounds for a harassment complaint." "He won't give up easily," Sarah said, watching Marcus through the window. "He doesn't handle rejection well, and in his mind, this is about his property being stolen, rather than a person making an independent choice." Jake's expression grew grim. "Property? That's how he sees relationships, investments to be managed and protected. I should have recognized it sooner." Dorothy exchanged a look with Jake. "We'll keep an eye on the situation. In the meantime, Sarah, I want you to document every contact he attempts. Phone calls, emails, visits, messages through third parties, everything." "You think it will escalate?" "I think it's better to be prepared," Dorothy said diplomatically. "Men like that don't like losing control, especially when they've convinced themselves they were doing you a favor by being with you." The accuracy of the assessment was unsettling. Sarah realized that Marcus probably genuinely believed he'd been generous by choosing her, that his attention had been a gift she should have been grateful to receive. Marcus finally drove away late that afternoon, but his presence had cast a shadow over what should have been a productive day. Sarah found herself jumping at unexpected sounds, checking the parking lot repeatedly, feeling like prey being stalked by a predator. Jake appeared at her office door as she was preparing to leave. "Want me to follow you back to the cabin? Make sure you get there safely?" The offer was practical and sensible, but Sarah found herself hesitating. "I don't want to be the kind of person who needs an escort to feel safe." "Needing help doesn't make you weak," Jake said. "It makes you smart enough to accept support when it's offered." The drive to the cabin was uneventful, but Sarah was grateful for Jake's truck in her rearview mirror. The mountain roads that had felt like paths to freedom now seemed isolated and vulnerable. Marcus's words echoed in her mind, alone in the middle of nowhere with nothing. At the cabin, Jake did a quick perimeter check while Sarah went inside, turning on lights and starting a fire in the wood stove. The familiar tasks were comforting, reminding her that this place had become home in ways her expensive apartment in Denver never had. "All clear," Jake reported, joining her in the main room. "But I think we should talk about security precautions." "You think he'll come here?" "I think he's the kind of man who believes he knows what's best for everyone else, and that makes him potentially dangerous." Jake sat across from her, his expression serious. "Have you ever felt physically threatened by him?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Not directly, but there were times when his anger felt controlled, like he was choosing not to let it loose rather than not having it at all." Jake nodded grimly. "That's what I was afraid of. Men who pride themselves on self-control sometimes use that control as a weapon." They make you feel like you should be grateful they're restraining themselves. The insight was uncomfortable but accurate. Sarah remembered walking on eggshells during Marcus's moods, working to prevent explosions that he would later credit himself for avoiding. "What kind of security precautions?" she asked. "Basic stuff. Keep your phone charged and with you at all times. Vary your routine. Don't leave for work at exactly the same time every day or take the same route. Let someone know when you're expecting to be somewhere and when to worry if you don't check in." Sarah absorbed the advice, hating that it was necessary, but recognizing its wisdom. "Do you think I made a mistake by confronting him today? Should I have hidden, let you and Dorothy handle it?" "Absolutely not." Jake's voice was firm. "You stood up for yourself, set clear boundaries, and refused to be manipulated. That was exactly right. Then why do I feel like I made everything worse? Because bullies always escalate when their usual tactics don't work. But that's not your fault, and it doesn't mean you should have handled it differently. They spent the evening reinforcing windows and checking door locks, tasks that felt both practical and symbolic. Sarah was protecting more than just her physical safety. She was defending the new life she'd built from someone who wanted to drag her back into a smaller, more controlled existence. As Jake prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "You know what impressed me most about today?" "What?" "You didn't doubt yourself even when he tried to make you question your own reality. 3 weeks ago, you might have wavered. Tonight, you were absolutely certain of who you are and what you want." Sarah felt a surge of pride at the observation. He was right. A month ago, Marcus's accusations might have shaken her confidence, made her wonder if she was making a terrible mistake. Now, his attempts at manipulation only reinforced her certainty that leaving him had been the right choice. "I've never felt more like myself than I do here," she admitted. "Even with all the uncertainty and the threats, I feel more real than I have in years." Jake smiled, and for a moment his carefully guarded expression was completely open. "That's what healing looks like, Sarah. Messy and scary and absolutely worth it." After he left, Sarah stood on the porch, listening to the night sounds of the mountains, wind in the pines, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of the stream behind the cabin. Marcus had called this place the middle of nowhere, implying it was a void where nothing meaningful could happen. He was wrong. This wasn't anywhere. This was exactly where she belonged, and she would fight to protect it from anyone who tried to take it away from her. The next morning brought an email that changed everything. Sarah was checking her personal account over coffee when she saw a message from an address she didn't recognize, but the subject line made her blood run cold. "We need to talk. Marcus." The message itself was brief, but loaded with implications. "Sarah, I know you're angry, but this situation affects more than just us. There are things you don't know, legal complications that could hurt you if you don't handle this properly. Meet me at the diner in town at noon. Come alone. We can resolve this quietly, or it can become a very public and expensive problem for you. Your choice." Sarah read the message 3 times, anger building with each pass. The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. Comply or face consequences. She forwarded the email to Jake and Dorothy before getting dressed for work, her hands shaking with fury rather than fear. By the time she reached the office, both Jake and Dorothy were waiting for her, their expressions grim. "Extortion," Dorothy said bluntly, looking up from Sarah's printed email. "Threatening legal action to coerce someone into a meeting they don't want to attend." "What kind of legal complications could he be talking about?" Sarah asked. "Probably nothing real," Jake said. "But guys like this often convince themselves they have leverage they don't actually have. Joint debts, shared property, things that seem bigger than they are when you're looking for ways to maintain control." Sarah tried to think of anything Marcus might be referring to. Their finances had been separate. The engagement ring was in her possession. and she'd never signed anything that would bind her to him legally beyond the wedding that never happened. "The wedding expenses," she said suddenly. "He paid for everything, venue, catering, flowers. Maybe he thinks he can sue me for reimbursement since I'm the one who caused the cancellation." Dorothy snorted. "Good luck proving damages when he's the one who walked out. But even if he tried, it would be a civil matter, not criminal, and frankly, any lawyer worth their license would tell him he doesn't have a case." "So what do I do about the meeting?" "Nothing," Jake said firmly. "You don't negotiate with bullies, and you don't reward threats by giving them what they want." Sarah nodded, but part of her was curious about what Marcus thought he could accomplish with this latest manipulation. The man she'd thought she knew for 3 years was revealing depths of controlling behavior she'd never suspected. "Send him a response," Dorothy suggested. "Short and clear, something like, 'Any communication between us should go through attorneys. Do not contact me again directly.'" Sarah typed the message and sent it before she could second-guess herself. The response came back within minutes. "You're making a mistake, Sarah. Don't say I didn't try to protect you." The ominous tone sent a chill down Sarah's spine, but it also crystallized something important. She was done being afraid of Marcus's threats and manipulation. Whatever he thought he could do to hurt her, she would face it with the support of people who actually cared about her well-being. The battle lines were drawn, and for the first time since Marcus had walked out of her life, Sarah felt ready to fight. The community picnic had been Sarah's idea, part of her strategy to strengthen connections between local businesses and law enforcement while showcasing Cedar Falls to potential tourists. What she hadn't anticipated was how the event would become a catalyst for changes she never saw coming. Main Street had been closed to traffic for the afternoon, transforming into a festival ground with booths from local artisans, food vendors, and the outdoor gear shops that formed the backbone of Cedar Falls' economy. Sarah moved through the crowd with a clipboard and camera, documenting the event for social media and taking notes on what worked well for future planning. "This turnout is incredible," Maria Santos called out from her gear shop's booth, where a steady stream of visitors was examining hiking equipment and asking about local trails. "We've had more genuine interest today than in the past 3 months." Combined, Sarah felt a surge of professional satisfaction. The event was succeeding beyond her most optimistic projections, drawing not just locals, but day trippers from Denver and Colorado Springs who had seen her promotional posts online. Dorothy had been right about the community's potential. It just needed someone to help coordinate and promote what was already there. She was photographing a demonstration by the local climbing guide service when Jake appeared at her elbow, his expression uncharacteristically tense. "We might have a problem," he said quietly. "Marcus is back. Spotted him parked at the overlook above town about an hour ago. He's been watching the festival through binoculars." Sarah's stomach dropped, but she forced herself to continue taking photos. "Is he breaking any laws?" "Not technically, it's a public road, public event, but the surveillance behavior is concerning." What does Dorothy think? She's coordinating with the state patrol to increase presence on the mountain roads, wants to make it clear he's being watched too. Sarah nodded, trying to maintain her professional composure while processing this new escalation. 3 days had passed since Marcus's threatening email, 3 days of blessed normalcy that had allowed her to focus on building her new life. She should have known it was too good to last. "Sarah!" A voice called her name from across the street. She turned to see Dr. Patricia Wells, the town's physician, and one of the community leaders she'd been working with on health and safety initiatives. But Dr. Wells wasn't alone. She was approaching a woman Sarah didn't recognize, someone whose expensive clothes and perfectly styled hair marked her as clearly out of place at a small-town mountain festival. "I'd like you to meet someone," Dr. Wells said as they reached Sarah. "This is Amanda Reeves, a family counselor from Denver. She's been asking about you." Sarah felt Jake tense beside her, his hand moving instinctively closer to his radio. Something about the woman's smile was predatory, all teeth and no warmth. "Miss Mitchell," Amanda Reeves extended a manicured hand. "I've been hoping to speak with you. I'm working with your fiancé to help mediate this difficult situation." "Former fiancé," Sarah corrected, not taking the offered hand. "And I'm not interested in mediation. I understand you're hurt and angry," Amanda continued smoothly, apparently unbothered by Sarah's rejection. "Marcus has explained the circumstances of your separation, and I think there's real potential for healing if we can just create a safe space for honest communication." Sarah felt a familiar chill of recognition. This was manipulation disguised as therapy, the kind of professional gaslighting that made victims doubt their own perceptions. "What exactly did Marcus tell you about our separation?" Sarah asked. Amanda's expression remained professionally sympathetic. "He's shared his concerns about your mental state following the wedding postponement, the impulsive decision to relocate, the isolation from your support network, the concerning attachment to people you've known only briefly." "Wedding postponement?" Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "Is that what he's calling it?" Dr. Wells looked confused, glancing between Sarah and Amanda. "I'm sorry, what's this about? Sarah, I thought your wedding was called off." "It was," Sarah said firmly. "Marcus abandoned me at the altar and then lied to everyone about what happened. Now he's apparently hired a therapist to help him continue the lie." Amanda's smile flickered but held. "Sarah, I can see you're very defensive, which is understandable given the trauma you've experienced. But denial isn't healthy, and neither is making life-altering decisions while you're in crisis." "I'm not in denial or crisis," Sarah replied, aware that people were beginning to notice the confrontation. "I'm in recovery from a toxic relationship with someone who can't accept that I have the right to make my own choices." "See, this is exactly what Marcus was concerned about," Amanda said, her tone becoming more clinical. "The paranoid thinking, the black-and-white interpretation of complex relationship dynamics, the inability to engage in constructive dialogue." Jake stepped forward, his badge visible on his belt. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification and credentials." Amanda's composed expression cracked slightly. "Excuse me? You're claiming to be a licensed therapist providing professional services. I need to verify that it's accurate." "This is a private conversation," Amanda protested. "This is a public event in my jurisdiction," Jake countered. "And what you're describing sounds less like therapy and more like harassment disguised as mental health intervention." Dr. Wells was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. She approached me at my office, said she was a colleague working with someone I knew. I had no idea." "It's not your fault," Sarah assured her. "You were being helpful to what seemed like a legitimate professional request." Amanda was digging through her purse with jerky movements, clearly not expecting to be challenged. "I don't have to justify my credentials to a small-town sheriff's deputy." "Actually, you do." Dorothy Martinez appeared as if from nowhere, her sheriff's uniform and authoritative presence immediately shifting the dynamic. "Practicing therapy without a license is a felony in Colorado. So is impersonating a mental health professional." "I am a licensed counselor," Amanda snapped, finally producing a business card and what appeared to be a professional license. Dorothy examined the documents carefully. "Licensed in Nevada, not Colorado, which means you have no legal authority to practice here. And according to this, you're a marriage and family therapist, not qualified to make the kind of psychological assessments you've been sharing." Sarah watched the confrontation with fascination and growing anger. Marcus had found someone willing to provide professional-sounding justification for his version of events, probably paying handsomely for the service. Furthermore, Dorothy continued, attempting to conduct therapy sessions without the subject's consent, especially for the purpose of supporting a third party's agenda, violates pretty much every ethical standard in your profession. Amanda's composed mask finally shattered completely. You people don't understand what you're dealing with. Sarah is clearly having a breakdown, and instead of getting her help, you're enabling her delusions. The only delusion here, Sarah said, her voice carrying clear across the suddenly quiet festival grounds, is Marcus's belief that he can manipulate me back into a relationship I never want to be in again. And apparently he's willing to pay people to help him do it. A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Sarah realized that half the town was now witnessing this confrontation, seeing firsthand the kind of pressure she'd been under since choosing to stay in Cedar Falls. Ms. Reeves, Dorothy said formally, I'm ordering you to cease any therapeutic contact with Ms. Mitchell immediately. Any further attempts to approach her under the guise of professional services will be considered harassment. Amanda looked around wildly, apparently realizing she'd lost control of the situation. You'll regret this, Sarah. When you end up isolated and alone because you've burned every bridge Marcus tried to build for you, remember that people tried to help. I'm not isolated, Sarah said, gesturing to the crowd of people who had gathered around her in support. I'm surrounded by people who respect my right to make my own choices. That's what actual help looks like. After Amanda stalked away, the festival gradually returned to its previous energy. But Sarah felt shaken by the encounter. The lengths Marcus was willing to go to maintain control were becoming genuinely frightening. You handled that perfectly, Dr. Wells said, her face flushed with embarrassment. I'm mortified that I was used to ambushing you like that. You couldn't have known, Sarah replied. This is Marcus's pattern. He finds ways to make his manipulations seem reasonable and well-intentioned. Jake appeared at her side again, radio crackling with chatter. State Patrol just pulled over Marcus's car, about 10 miles down the mountain. Routine traffic stop, but he knows he's being watched. Sarah nodded, trying to process the implications. Marcus was escalating his tactics, but also becoming sloppy, desperate. That made him more dangerous, but also more likely to make mistakes that would give law enforcement grounds to intervene. The festival continued successfully, but Sarah found herself looking over her shoulder, hyper-aware of every unfamiliar face. In the crowd, the joy of the day had been tainted by Marcus's shadow, his ability to reach into her new life and twist it to serve his agenda. That evening, as volunteers cleaned up Main Street, Sarah retreated to the sheriff's office to decompress and process the day's events. She was updating her documentation of Marcus's harassment when her computer pinged with a new email. The sender was unfamiliar, but the subject line made her heart race. Information about Marcus Brennan you need to see. Against her better judgment, Sarah opened the message. It was from someone named Jessica Chen, claiming to be Marcus's ex-girlfriend from before Sarah. The message was brief but explosive. I saw the story about what happened at your festival today. Someone posted a video online and I recognized Marcus immediately. He did the same thing to me 2 years ago, hired people to make me seem crazy when I tried to leave him. I have evidence, recordings, emails, documentation of his harassment campaign. I've been building a case, but didn't have enough evidence. If you're willing to work with me, we might be able to stop him permanently. Sarah stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Marcus had done this before. She wasn't his first victim, and she probably wouldn't be his last, unless someone stopped him. Jake found her 20 minutes later, still staring at the email. You look like you've seen a ghost, he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. Sarah turned her computer screen toward him. Read this. Jake's expression grew darker with each line. Have you responded yet? I wanted to talk to you. And Dorothy first. This could be exactly what we need to build a real case against him, or it could be another manipulation. I don't know how to tell the difference anymore. Let's find out, Jake said, reaching for his phone. Dorothy's got contacts with Denver PD. We can verify Jessica Chen's identity, see if there are any police reports involving Marcus. An hour later, Dorothy returned to the office with a grim expression and a file folder. Jessica Chen is real. 28 years old, marketing executive at a tech company in Denver. And she's filed 3 harassment complaints against Marcus Brennan over the past 18 months. Sarah felt vindicated and sick at the same time. What kind of harassment? Similar pattern to what you're experiencing. Hired a private investigator to follow her, created fake social media accounts to monitor her activities, sent gifts and letters to her workplace after she blocked all direct contact. Why wasn't he prosecuted? Because he's smart about staying just on the legal side of the line, and because he has money for lawyers who know how to work the system. Dorothy sat down heavily. But 3 victims showing a pattern of behavior. That's a different story, Jake leaned forward. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time to contact the FBI. This level of systematic harassment across state lines makes it a federal issue, and federal prosecutors have resources that county attorneys don't. Sarah felt a mixture of hope and terror. Taking on Marcus had felt manageable when it was just about escaping his influence on her life, but the scope of his behavior was apparently much larger and more dangerous than she'd realized. There's something else, Dorothy continued. Jessica. Chen isn't his only ex who's filed complaints. We found 2 other women in other states with similar stories. This isn't about you specifically, Sarah. This is about a man who sees women as possessions and won't tolerate losing control of them. The revelation was simultaneously liberating and horrifying. Liberating because it confirmed that Marcus's obsession wasn't about love or genuine concern for her welfare. It was about power and control. Horrifying because it meant he was a genuine predator who had been operating unchecked for years. I want to help, Sarah said finally. Whatever it takes to stop him from doing this to other women. Dorothy nodded approvingly. I'll make some calls tonight, set up a meeting with federal investigators. In the meantime, we need to increase security around you. If Marcus realizes we're building a case, he might escalate significantly. As if summoned by her words, Jake's radio crackled with an urgent message from State Patrol. Be advised, suspect vehicle last seen heading north on Forest Service Road 247, direction unknown. Forest Service Road 247 led directly to Sarah's cabin. Go, Dorothy ordered, already reaching for her keys. I'll be right behind you. Sarah's heart hammered as they raced through the mountain roads, Jake's truck flying over terrain that had seemed peaceful just hours before. The night was moonless, their headlights carving through darkness that suddenly felt malevolent rather than protective. There, Jake said, pointing ahead. Through the trees, they could see light where no light should be. Someone was at the cabin. As they rounded the final curve, Sarah gasped. Marcus's rental car was parked in her driveway, and every light in the cabin was on. Through the windows, she could see a figure moving around inside, going through her belongings. Stay in the truck, Jake ordered, reaching for his radio. All units, we have a break-in in progress, but Sarah was already opening her door, fury overriding caution. That's my home, she said. He doesn't get to take that too. The confrontation that followed would change everything, setting in motion events that would finally force Marcus to face consequences for years of psychological terrorism disguised as love. The scene inside the cabin was worse than Sarah had imagined. Marcus had systematically gone through every room, every drawer, every personal space she'd created in her new life. Her clothes were scattered across the bedroom floor, papers from her work strewn across the kitchen table, and her Laptop sat open with files displayed that had no bearing on anything he could legitimately need. "Step away from the computer," Jake commanded, his weapon drawn but held low. "Hands where I can see them." Marcus turned slowly, his face a mask of righteous indignation. "I'm retrieving property that belongs to me. Sarah took things when she ran away that she had no right to take." "Such as?" Jake's voice was deadly calm. "Financial documents, passwords to accounts we shared, personal items I gave her during our relationship." Marcus gestured at the chaos around them. "I have every right to recover my property." Sarah stepped into the cabin behind Jake, her fury cold and focused. "Show me one thing in this cabin that belongs to you, Marcus. One single item." Marcus's gaze shifted to her laptop. "The computer contains files related to our joint finances, vacation bookings, wedding planning documents that I paid for. Those files belong to me. The computer belongs to me, and so do any files on it," Sarah replied, evenly. "The wedding you paid for never happened because you chose to abandon it, and we never had joint finances. You made sure of that." Jake moved closer to Marcus, his posture controlled but ready. "Sir, you're going to need to come with me. Breaking and entering is a felony, regardless of your claimed justification." "This is harassment," Marcus snapped. "I'm being criminalized for trying to resolve a dispute with my fiancé." "Former fiancé," Sarah corrected for what felt like the 100th time. "And you're being arrested for breaking into my home and going through my private belongings without permission." As Jake placed Marcus in handcuffs, Dorothy arrived with backup, 2 state patrol officers who had been monitoring the situation from the road. The small cabin suddenly felt crowded with law enforcement, but Sarah found their presence comforting rather than overwhelming. "We'll need photographs of everything," Dorothy told Sarah. "Document the intrusion, catalog what was disturbed. This is evidence now." Sarah moved through her violated space with growing rage. Marcus hadn't just searched randomly, he'd targeted specific items. Her journal, which had been in a drawer, was open on the bed to entries about Jake. Her work files were arranged in a way that suggested he'd been photographing them. Most disturbing, her bathroom had been searched thoroughly, including her medication cabinet. "He was looking for something specific," she told Dorothy. "This wasn't just about retrieving property. He was gathering intelligence." Dorothy's expression grew grim. "What kind of intelligence?" "Evidence to support his narrative that I'm mentally unstable. My antidepressants are missing, not the whole bottle, just a few pills. Probably to test them and claim I'm abusing medication." Jake returned from securing Marcus in the patrol car, his face dark with controlled anger. "He's demanding to call his lawyer, claims this is all a misunderstanding that will be resolved quickly." "Let him call," Dorothy said. "We've got him dead to rights on breaking and entering, criminal trespass, and possibly theft, if we can prove he took anything." Sarah continued documenting the intrusion, but her mind was racing beyond the immediate crisis. Marcus's behavior tonight wasn't desperate fumbling. It was calculated reconnaissance. He was gathering ammunition for a larger assault on her credibility and autonomy. "There's something else," she told Dorothy. "I think he's been planning this for a while. The fake therapist today, the surveillance, now this break-in. It's all coordinated." Coordinated toward what end? Sarah felt pieces clicking into place, a horrible picture emerging from Marcus's pattern of behavior. Involuntary commitment. If he can build a case that I'm mentally unstable and dangerous to myself, he might be able to have me committed for psychiatric evaluation. The suggestion landed like a bomb in the small cabin. Jake and Dorothy exchanged looks that confirmed Sarah's fears weren't paranoid. They were entirely possible. "In Colorado, family members can petition for emergency psychiatric holds," Dorothy said slowly. "But you two aren't married or legally related." "We were engaged. He might claim common law marriage, or argue that as my former fiancé, he has standing to express concern for my welfare." Sarah's legal research during her relationship with Marcus was paying off in ways she'd never wanted. If he can present evidence of erratic behavior, drug abuse, isolation from support systems, and inability to care for myself, son of a bitch, Jake muttered. That's why he's been so methodical. He's not trying to win you back. He's trying to have you declared incompetent. The revelation was terrifying in its implications. Involuntary commitment would destroy everything Sarah had built in Cedar Falls. Her job, her newfound independence, her growing relationship with Jake, all of it would be gone, replaced by enforced medication and institutional control that could last months or even years. Can he actually do that? Sarah asked. Depends on how convincing his evidence is and whether he can find a sympathetic judge, Dorothy replied grimly. Mental health laws are designed to err on the side of caution. If someone makes a compelling case that you're a danger to yourself... Sarah sank into a chair, the magnitude of Marcus's strategy overwhelming her. He's been setting this up since the day he left me at the altar. Every time I've asserted my independence, every choice I've made to build a new life, he's been documented as evidence of mental illness. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Police can't protect you from yourself, Sarah. This ends when you come home and get the help you need. Jake read the message over her shoulder, his jaw clenched with fury. Save that. Add it to the evidence file. But Sarah was thinking beyond evidence collection. Marcus had just revealed his timeline. This was ending soon, one way or another. Either she would voluntarily return to his control, or he would use the legal system to force her into institutional control. I need to call Jessica Chen, Sarah said suddenly. If Marcus has done this before, she might know how he operates, what kind of evidence he typically gathers. Dorothy nodded. Do it, but we also need to get ahead of this. I'm calling the FBI, a contact tonight. If Marcus is planning to file commitment papers, we need federal intervention before he can manipulate the local court system. As law enforcement processed the crime scene and prepared to transport Marcus to county lockup, Sarah found herself standing on the cabin's front porch, looking out at the mountains that had become her sanctuary. The violation of her home felt like a physical assault, but underneath the anger and fear was something else, determination. Marcus had made a critical error tonight. In his arrogance, he'd moved from psychological manipulation to criminal behavior, giving law enforcement concrete evidence of his true nature. More importantly, he'd revealed the scope of his plan, allowing Sarah and her allies to prepare countermeasures. Her phone rang, Jessica Chen, responding to Sarah's earlier email. I saw the news about the break-in, Jessica said without preamble. How are you holding up? Angry but functional. Dorothy Martinez, our county sheriff, wants to coordinate with federal investigators. Are you willing to participate in a joint case? God, yes. I've been waiting 2 years for someone to take this seriously. Jessica's relief was palpable. Sarah, there's something you need to know about Marcus's commitment strategy. He tried it with me too. Sarah's blood ran cold. What happened? He managed to get me held for a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. Had documentation of everything. My medication history, social media posts he claimed showed instability, statements from people he'd paid to express concern about my behavior. How did you get out? My sister's a lawyer. She got me released and helped me file countercharges for false imprisonment and conspiracy. But the experience was traumatic enough that I moved states to get away from him. Sarah felt sick. How long did he plan it? Months, maybe longer. He documented everything, what I ate, when I slept, who I talked to, presented it all as evidence of declining mental health rather than normal life variations. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, Jessica sharing details about Marcus's methods that were chillingly familiar. The fake concern from hired professionals, the systematic documentation of normal behaviors presented as symptoms, the use of financial resources to make his manipulations seem legitimate. The good news, Jessica concluded, is that I kept records of everything, too. Police reports, medical records proving I was never actually mentally ill, evidence of the people he paid to support his narrative. If we combine our cases, we might finally have enough to stop him. When Sarah ended the call, she found Jake waiting on the porch with 2 cups of coffee and a grim expression. "Dorothy's coordinating with the FBI," he reported. "Agent Linda Torres is driving up from Denver tonight to interview you and review the evidence. She specializes in interstate stalking cases." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully, noting how Jake's presence had become a source of stability in the chaos surrounding her. Jessica Chen confirmed that Marcus tried the same strategy with her. Forced commitment based on fabricated evidence. Did it work? Temporarily. She was held for 3 days before her sister got her released, but the experience was traumatic enough to force her to move across the country. Jake's expression darkened further. How many women has he done this to? Apparently, we're not the only ones. Jessica mentioned a support group for survivors of Marcus's harassment, women from at least 4 different states. The scope of Marcus's predatory behavior was staggering. Sarah realized she wasn't just fighting for her own freedom. She was potentially the key to stopping a serial psychological abuser who had been operating with impunity for years. "There's something else," Jake said quietly. "While you were on the phone, I was thinking about tonight's break-in, the way he searched your place, the specific things he targeted. This wasn't his first time in the cabin." Sarah stared at him. "What do you mean?" I think he's been here before, probably multiple times. The way he knew exactly where to look for things, how quickly he found your personal items. You don't search a place that efficiently unless you've mapped it out already." The implications were horrifying. Sarah thought about all the times she'd felt watched, all the moments when something had seemed slightly off about the cabin's security. Marcus hadn't just broken in tonight. He'd been violating her sanctuary for weeks. How is that possible? You've been checking the perimeter regularly. "He's good at this," Jake admitted grimly. "Professional-level surveillance skills. Either he has training, or he's hired people who do." Sarah felt the last vestiges of safety crumble around her. The cabin that had been her refuge, the mountains that had felt like protection, the new life she'd built in Cedar Falls, all of it had been compromised by Marcus's systematic invasion of her privacy. "I can't stay here," she said, the words coming out flat and emotionless, "not knowing he's been watching me, going through my things whenever he wanted." "You're not giving up the cabin," Jake said firmly. "We're going to secure it properly and make sure he can never get near you again." "How?" "He's got resources, professional help, and apparently years of experience manipulating the system." "What do we have?" Jake turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense in the porch light. "We have the truth. We have evidence. We have federal investigators who specialize in exactly this kind of case. And we have each other." The last part was said quietly, but it carried weight that made Sarah's chest tighten with emotion. In all her years with Marcus, she'd never felt the kind of solid, reliable support that Jake offered without question or condition. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You could have just helped me get to Montana and walked away. Instead, you're putting yourself in the middle of a federal case." Jake was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the dark mountains. "Because 3 years ago, when I thought my life was over, people in this community refused to let me disappear. They gave me a reason to keep going when I couldn't find one myself." He met her eyes again. "And because what Marcus is doing to you is evil, and evil should be stopped when we have the power to stop it." The simple moral clarity of his statement was both comforting and inspiring. Sarah realized that she'd spent so long in Marcus's world of manipulation and conditional affection that she'd forgotten what genuine care looked like. "Agent Torres should be here within the hour," Jake continued. "After that, we'll know what kind of federal case we can build. But regardless of what happens legally, you're not facing this alone anymore." As if summoned by his words, headlights appeared on the mountain road, a dark sedan with government plates pulling into the cabin's clearing. Agent Linda Torres was a compact woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and the kind of contained energy that suggested extensive field experience. "Miss Mitchell," she said, climbing out of her car with a briefcase and recording equipment, "I understand you've been dealing with systematic harassment that crosses state lines. Let's talk about putting an end to it." The conversation that followed would last until dawn, covering not just Sarah's experiences but the broader pattern of Marcus's behavior across multiple victims and jurisdictions. By the time the sun rose over the mountains, the foundation would be laid for a federal case that could finally hold Marcus accountable for years of psychological terrorism. But first, Sarah had to relive every moment of manipulation and control she'd endured, transforming her pain into evidence that could protect other women from suffering the same fate. It would be the hardest thing she'd ever done, but also the most important. Agent Torres's interview stretched through the night, a methodical reconstruction of every interaction Sarah had experienced with Marcus since their first meeting 3 years earlier. What had seemed like a romantic courtship in her memory took on a sinister cast when examined through the lens of professional psychological manipulation. "He isolated you gradually," Torres observed, reviewing her notes as dawn broke over the mountains. "Classic predator pattern. First, he became your primary source of validation and support. Then, he systematically weakened your other relationships until you were dependent on him for social connection." Sarah traced the pattern with growing horror. Marcus had indeed encouraged her to spend less time with friends who didn't understand their relationship. He'd convinced her to change jobs to one where she'd have less autonomy and fewer colleagues to confide in. Even her apartment had been strategically chosen, far enough from her old neighborhood to make maintaining previous friendships difficult. The engagement itself was a control mechanism, Torres continued. Public commitment that made it harder for you to leave. Legal framework he could later exploit for custody or financial claims. "But we never married," Sarah protested. It didn't matter. The engagement created social and psychological pressure to stay committed, even when your instincts told you something was wrong. Jake had been sitting quietly throughout the interview, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly serving as a steady presence while Sarah relived years of manipulation. Now he leaned forward with obvious concern. "How many other victims are we talking about?" he asked. Torres consulted her tablet, scrolling through files that apparently contained more information than Sarah had expected. 7 confirmed cases across 5 states, dating back 6 years. The pattern is remarkably consistent. Initial love bombing followed by gradual isolation, financial entanglement, and psychological conditioning, designed to make the victim doubt their own judgment. The scope was staggering. Sarah felt sick thinking about 6 other women who had endured what she'd experienced, possibly worse. What happened to them? Varied outcomes. 2 successfully escaped with help from family members. 1 is still in therapy, recovering from what her psychiatrist describes as induced trauma bonding. 3 others, Torres paused, choosing her words carefully. 3 others were successfully committed to psychiatric facilities based on Marcus's fabricated evidence. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the cabin's wall clock. Sarah felt as if she was staring into an abyss, the fate that Marcus had planned for her, that he'd already inflicted on others. How long were they held? Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. 6 months, 14 months, and 8 months respectively. All were eventually released when independent psychiatric evaluations contradicted Marcus's claims, but the damage was extensive. Lost jobs, destroyed credit, severed family relationships, exactly the kind of comprehensive life destruction that makes it nearly impossible to recover and speak out. Jake's hand clenched into a fist on the table. How is this legal? How does someone get away with destroying lives like this? Because the system is designed to err on the side of caution when someone claims a person is mentally ill and dangerous, Torres explained. Emergency commitment laws exist to protect people who genuinely can't make rational decisions for themselves. But those same laws can be weaponized by skilled manipulators who understand how to present evidence in ways that support their narrative. Sarah absorbed this information with a growing sense of determination. She could have been victim number 8, trapped in institutional care, while Marcus convinced everyone she was too mentally ill to make her own decisions. "What kind of evidence can we build against him?" she asked. Torres smiled for the first time since arriving, a sharp expression that suggested she'd been waiting for exactly this question. "With 7 victims willing to testify, we can establish a pattern of behavior that goes far beyond individual relationship problems. We're talking federal charges for conspiracy, wire fraud, identity theft, and civil rights violations." Identity theft? Marcus has been using fake credentials and hired individuals to impersonate mental health professionals. That's identity theft on a scale that crosses state lines, making it a federal crime with serious penalties. Sarah felt a surge of hope, but Torres's next words tempered her optimism. "However, building a case in this complex will take time, probably 6 to 8 months. During that period, Marcus will remain free on bail, and he'll know we're building a case against him." "Meaning he'll escalate," Jake said grimly. "Almost. Certainly. Men like Marcus don't accept defeat gracefully. If he realizes he's about to face serious federal charges, he'll likely make one final attempt to regain control over the situation." The warning sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "What kind of attempt? Hard to predict, but based on his psychological profile, probably something dramatic designed to either force your compliance or discredit you so thoroughly that your testimony becomes worthless." Sarah stood up, needing to move as her mind raced. Through possibilities, Marcus had already tried manipulation, hired professionals, break-ins, and surveillance. What was left? "There's something we haven't discussed," she said suddenly. "Marcus has money and connections in Denver's business community. What if he tries to destroy my reputation professionally? Make it impossible for me to work anywhere?" Torres nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. That's exactly the kind of long-term damage he specializes in. We'll need to get ahead of that by documenting his pattern with previous victims and issuing warnings to potential employers or professional contacts." The conversation was interrupted by Jake's radio, crackling with an urgent message from Dorothy. "All units, be advised, suspect Marcus Brennan has been released on bail. Repeat, the suspect is no longer in custody." Sarah felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. "How is that possible? He was arrested for breaking and entering just hours ago." Torres was already reaching for her phone. "Expensive lawyer, probably. Emergency bail hearing. Minimal flight risk because he has ties to the community through you." Jake was on his feet, moving to check the cabin's security systems. "How long until he can legally approach Sarah?" "Depends on whether the judge issued a restraining order as a condition of bail," Torres replied, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke rapidly with someone at the federal building. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message that made her blood run cold. "Disappointed in your choices. Sarah, time for consequences." She showed the message to Jake and Torres, watching their expressions harden with professional concern. "That's a direct threat," Torres said. "Violation of any restraining order that might be in place, and evidence of continued harassment. "But what does it mean practically?" Sarah asked. "What kind of consequences is he talking about?" Before anyone could answer, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed her former employer in Denver, the marketing firm she'd resigned from when she moved to Cedar Falls. "Sarah, thank God you answered." Her former boss, David Chen, sounded frantic. "I've been getting calls all morning from someone claiming to be a private investigator working with your family. They're saying you've had a mental breakdown and are making dangerous decisions that could affect our company's reputation." Sarah felt the room spin around her. "David, whatever they told you is a lie. My ex-fiancé is trying to—" They had documentation, Sarah. Medical records, statements from people who know you, evidence that you've been struggling with psychiatric issues for months. "That's all fabricated," Sarah said desperately. "David, you know me. You worked with me for 2 years. Have I ever shown signs of mental illness?" There was a pause that lasted too long. "Honestly, Sarah, the last few months before you left, you did seem different. Stressed, distracted, making decisions that didn't seem like you." Sarah realized with horror that Marcus had been conditioning her workplace relationships long before the wedding, creating a foundation for exactly this. A kind of character assassination. "Listen to me very carefully," she said, aware that Torres was recording the conversation. "The man behind these calls is my abusive ex-fiancé, who abandoned me at our wedding and is now systematically trying to destroy my life. Whatever evidence he's provided is either fake or taken out of context. Sarah, I want to believe you, but they're threatening to sue the company for negligent hiring if we don't cooperate with their investigation into your mental state." The call ended with David promising to look into the situation, but clearly already convinced that Sarah was an unstable liability. Within an hour, she received similar calls from 3 other professional contacts, all reporting visits or calls. From investigators concerned about her mental health. "He's moving fast," Torres observed, documenting each contact as Sarah reported it. "This is a coordinated campaign designed to destroy your credibility before our case can develop." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "How do I fight this? By the time we prove the allegations are false, the damage will be done. No one will hire me. No one will believe anything I say about Marcus." Jake appeared at her side, his presence, grounding her in the midst of the chaos. "We fight back with truth, document everything, record every conversation, get statements from people who know you here in Cedar Falls." "Will that be enough?" "It has to be," Torres said grimly. "Because this is probably just the opening move. Marcus is testing how effectively he can isolate you and discredit you. If this works, he'll escalate to the next phase, which is direct confrontation, forced intervention disguised as concerned family or friends trying to help you, possibly involving medical professionals he's paid to support his narrative." Sarah's phone rang again. This time it was Betty from the diner, her voice tight with concern. "Sarah, honey, there's a man here claiming to be your brother. Says the family's worried about you and he needs to know where you're staying. I told him I didn't know any brother, but he's got identification and seems to know things about you." "I don't have a brother," Sarah said flatly. "Betty, do not tell him anything. That man is dangerous." "I figured as much. Got that feeling about him, you know, but he's been talking to other folks in town, and some people think maybe they should help him find you." Sarah realized that Marcus was working multiple angles simultaneously. Professional destruction and local manipulation, creating a perfect storm designed to strip away every support system she'd built. "Betty, can you spread the word? This man is my abusive ex-fiancé, not my brother. He's trying to hurt me, and anyone who helps him is putting me in danger." "Already on it, sweetheart. Small towns protect their own, and you're one of ours now." After ending the call, Sarah looked around the cabin that had been her sanctuary, now feeling exposed and vulnerable despite the law enforcement presence. "I can't keep running," she said suddenly. "Every time I build something, Marcus tears it down. Every time I find safety, he finds a way to reach me. This has to end." Torres leaned forward intently. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we should stop playing defense and start playing offense. If Marcus wants a confrontation, let's give him one, but on our terms, with federal investigators recording every word." Jake's expression grew concerned. "Sarah, that's extremely dangerous. If Marcus is as unstable as we think, direct confrontation could trigger violence." "He's already being violent," Sarah countered. "Psychological violence, but violence nonetheless. And he's escalating, whether I hide or not. At least if we control the confrontation, we can gather evidence while protecting ourselves." Torres was nodding slowly. "It's risky, but it could work. We set up a controlled meeting, full surveillance, and multiple backup plans. Force Marcus to reveal his true nature in a way that provides incontrovertible evidence for prosecution." "Like what?" "Like getting him to admit on tape that he's been fabricating evidence of your mental illness, getting him to threaten you directly, maybe even getting him to attempt the forced intervention we think he's planning." Sarah felt a mixture of terror and determination. The plan was dangerous, but continuing to run while Marcus systematically destroyed her life was also dangerous. What would the meeting look like? Torres pulled out her tablet, already sketching preliminary ideas. Neutral location, heavy surveillance, multiple exit strategies. We'd need to give Marcus enough incentive to attend while ensuring your safety throughout. What kind of incentive? You, apparently willing to reconcile, maybe expressing doubts about your new life, concerns about your mental state. Everything he's been trying to convince you of, presented as if you're finally accepting his version of reality. The thought of pretending to submit to Marcus's manipulation made Sarah's skin crawl, but she recognized the strategic value. "And meanwhile you record everything?" "Everything. His admissions about fabricating evidence, his threats, his attempts to control and manipulate you. All of it captured on federal surveillance equipment and usable in court." Jake was shaking his head. "There are too many variables. What if he sees through the deception? What if he brings help? What if something goes wrong with the surveillance?" "Then we adapt," Sarah said firmly. "But Jake, I can't live my life hiding in the mountains while Marcus destroys everything I care about. At some point, I have to face him." Torres was reviewing protocols on her tablet. "We can make this work, but it will require precise planning and flawless execution. Any mistakes could result in serious harm to Ms. Mitchell. Or," Sarah said quietly, "it could finally give us the evidence we need to stop Marcus from hurting anyone else ever again." The decision was made at that moment. Though the details would take hours to finalize, Sarah was going to face her tormentor one last time, not as a victim fleeing in terror, but as a woman determined to reclaim her life and protect others from suffering the same fate. The confrontation would be dangerous, but for the first time since Marcus had walked out of her wedding, Sarah felt like she was choosing her own battle rather than simply reacting to his attacks. It was a crucial distinction that would determine not just the outcome of their conflict, but the kind of person she would become when it was over. The meeting was set for neutral ground, the community center in Cedar Falls, chosen because it offered multiple exit points and excellent acoustics for surveillance equipment. Agent Torres had spent 2 days coordinating with local law enforcement, establishing overlapping security perimeters that would ensure Sarah's safety while capturing every word of her confrontation with Marcus. Sarah sat in the center's main room, wearing clothes carefully chosen to suggest vulnerability, an oversized sweater that made her appear smaller, minimal makeup that emphasized the stress lines around her eyes. Everything about her appearance was designed to feed Marcus's ego, to make him believe he was finally regaining control over the situation. Hidden throughout the room were 6 separate recording devices, backup systems for backup systems, ensuring that no technical failure could compromise the evidence they were about to gather. Torres and her team monitored from a van outside, while Jake and Dorothy positioned themselves in adjacent buildings with clear sightlines to the center. Marcus arrived precisely on time, his expensive suit and confident stride suggesting he believed. This meeting represented his victory. Sarah felt her stomach clench with familiar anxiety as he approached, but underneath the fear was something new. A cold determination to end his reign of terror permanently. "Sarah," he said, settling into the chair across from her, with the satisfied expression of someone who believed he'd orchestrated this reconciliation. "I'm so glad you finally came to your senses. I've been thinking about what you said," Sarah replied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "About needing help, about not thinking clearly." Marcus leaned forward eagerly. "Of course you have. I knew that once you got away from those people filling your head with paranoid nonsense, you'd recognize that I've only ever wanted what's best for you." "The isolation has been difficult," Sarah continued, playing her role, while Torres's voice whispered encouragement through her nearly invisible earpiece. "Being cut off from everyone I knew in Denver, trying to build a life with strangers." "Exactly." Marcus's mask of concern couldn't quite hide his triumph. "Sarah, you've been manipulated by people who don't really know you. That sheriff's deputy, for instance, he's clearly taking advantage of your vulnerable state." Sarah felt anger flare at the mention of Jake, but she forced herself to stay in character. "You think so? I know so. Men like that prey on damaged women. They offer protection and support when you're weak, but it's not real love, Sarah. It's exploitation. And what you offered was real love." Marcus's expression grew tender, a masterful performance of the caring fiancé. "What I offered was a future, stability, security, a place in a community where you were valued and protected. Instead, you chose to run off with the first man who paid attention to your distress." Sarah felt the familiar disorientation that Marcus's version of reality always created, the way he could make her own memories seem unreliable. But now she recognized it as a technique, a calculated assault on her sense of truth. "I want to understand," she said carefully. "Help me understand what happened at our wedding." Marcus's face shifted, preparing to deliver the narrative he'd crafted. "Sarah, you had a panic attack. I found you in the bridal suite, completely overwhelmed, saying you couldn't go through with the ceremony. I was trying to calm you down when you ran outside. That's not what happened. You were in a crisis, sweetheart. Your memory of the event is compromised by psychological trauma. That's why you need professional help to process what really occurred." Sarah stared at him, marveling at his ability to rewrite history so completely. Through her earpiece, she heard Torres's voice. "Keep him talking. Get him to elaborate on the professional help." "What kind of professional help?" Sarah asked. Marcus reached into his jacket, producing a set of papers that made Sarah's blood run cold. "I've arranged for a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation at a facility in Denver. They specialize in treating women who've experienced psychological breaks following traumatic life events." "You want to have me committed?" "I want to get you the help you need," Marcus corrected smoothly. "Sarah, look at your behavior over the past month. You've abandoned your career, your home, your support system. You're living in isolation in the mountains, forming inappropriate attachments to people you barely know. These are textbook symptoms of a psychological crisis." Sarah forced herself to appear to consider his words, though internally she was documenting every manipulation tactic. "And if I agree with this evaluation, then we can start rebuilding what we had. Once you're stable and thinking clearly again, we can plan a proper wedding, maybe somewhere more private this time." The casual assumption that she would return to him after psychiatric treatment revealed everything about how Marcus viewed her. not as a person with autonomy, but as a possession that had malfunctioned and needed repair. "What if the evaluation shows I'm mentally healthy?" Sarah asked. Marcus's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold underneath. "That's not going to happen, Sarah. I have extensive documentation of your declining mental state over the past year. Medical records, witness statements, evidence of erratic behavior patterns." "What kind of evidence?" "Security footage from your apartment building showing you leaving at odd hours, credit card records indicating impulsive purchases, testimony from colleagues about your deteriorating work performance." Sarah realized he was describing normal life activities through the lens of mental illness. Late-night grocery runs became evidence of insomnia and poor judgment. Buying new clothes became impulsive spending. Work stress became deteriorating. "Performance. You've been watching me for over a year," she said. Not quite a question. "I've been protecting you," Marcus replied without shame. "Someone had to document what was happening so you could get appropriate treatment when the crisis finally reached its peak." Through her earpiece, Torres's voice was barely controlled. "He's admitting to systematic surveillance." "Keep going." "And the other women?" Sarah asked, taking a calculated risk. "Jessica Chen, Amanda Rodriguez, the others. Were you protecting them too?" Marcus's expression went completely still, a predator recognizing unexpected danger. "I don't know what you're talking about. The women before me who went through the same pattern. Isolation, documentation, forced psychiatric evaluation. You've done this before, Marcus." For the first time in the conversation, Marcus looked genuinely angry rather than manipulatively concerned. "You've been talking to people who want to poison you against me. This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that proves you need professional intervention. It's not paranoid if it's true." Marcus stood abruptly, his careful composure finally cracking. "You're sicker than I thought, Sarah. These conspiracy theories, these delusions about some pattern of behavior, you're constructing an entire fantasy to avoid dealing with your own mental illness. The only fantasy here is your belief that you can control women by convincing them they're crazy." Marcus's face flushed with rage, his voice rising. "I saved you, Sarah. You were nothing when I found you. Directionless, weak, completely without purpose. I gave you structure, goals, a future worth having, and this is how you repay me, by running off to play house with some small-town sheriff and making up lies about my character." "There it is," Sarah said quietly, aware that everything was being recorded. The real Marcus Brennan, not the concerned fiancé or the protective ex, but the man who thinks women are projects to be managed and improved. Marcus seemed to realize he'd revealed too much. He sat back down, visibly struggling to regain his composure. "Sarah, you're obviously more disturbed than I realized. We need to get you help immediately. I'm not going anywhere with you. You don't have a choice." Marcus's voice was calm again, but there was steel underneath. "I have a court order for emergency psychiatric evaluation based on credible evidence that you're a danger to yourself. Sheriff's deputies are waiting outside to escort you to the facility." Sarah felt terror spike through her determination. "You can't do that. I already have. The paperwork was filed this morning, approved by Judge Peterson based on my documentation of your deteriorating condition. By tonight, you'll be safely in professional care where you can't hurt yourself anymore." Through her earpiece, Torres's voice cut through Sarah's panic. "Fake court order. We checked, no papers were filed. He's bluffing to force compliance." Sarah felt her confidence return. "Show me the court order." Marcus hesitated for just a moment too long. "The deputies have the official documentation." "Then call them in. Let me see this supposed court order." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Sarah, don't make this harder than it needs to be. If you cooperate, the transition will be easier for everyone." "There is no court order." Sarah said with growing certainty. There are no deputies waiting outside. This is just another manipulation, another lie designed to make me comply with what you want. Marcus's careful facade finally shattered completely. You ungrateful little bitch, he snarled, all pretense of concern vanishing. He gave you everything, a life, a future, meaning, and you threw it away to play house with some broken-down cop in the middle of nowhere. There it is, Sarah said, standing up calmly. The real reason you can't let me go. It's not about love or concern for my welfare. It's about your ego. You can't stand that I chose a different life over the one you designed for me. Marcus lunged forward, grabbing her wrist with enough force to leave bruises. You're coming with me right now. We're going to Denver. You're going to get the help you need. And when you're thinking clearly again, you're going to apologize for putting me through this nightmare. Let go of me. Not until you understand that this fantasy life you've built here isn't real. These people don't actually care about you, Sarah. They're just playing out their own rescue fantasies, and when they get bored, you'll be left with nothing. Sarah looked directly into Marcus's eyes, seeing clearly, for perhaps the first time, the hollow core where empathy should have been. You're wrong. They care about me because I'm worth caring about, not because I fit into some predetermined role they designed for me. Marcus's grip tightened. We're leaving, now! The community center's doors burst open as Jake, Dorothy, and Agent Torres entered with weapons drawn. Marcus released Sarah's wrist and stepped back, his expression shifting rapidly between rage and calculation. Marcus Brennan, Torres announced formally, you're under arrest for conspiracy, interstate harassment, wire fraud, and assault. You have the right to remain silent. As federal agents placed Marcus in handcuffs, he looked at Sarah with something that might have been genuine confusion. I was trying to save you, he said, as if he actually believed it. No, Sarah replied, quietly. You were trying to own me. There's a difference. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the porch of her cabin, now truly her cabin, purchased with her savings and a small loan from the Cedar Falls Community Bank. Marcus was serving 18 months in federal prison after pleading guilty to reduced charges, his pattern of abuse finally exposed through the testimony of 7 women who had found the courage to speak truth to power. Jake emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee, moving with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged in this space. Their relationship had deepened slowly, built on mutual respect and genuine care rather than the manufactured intensity that Marcus had mistaken for love. Torres called, Jake said, settling into the chair beside her. Marcus's appeals were denied. He'll serve the full sentence, Sarah nodded, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but the cost had been enormous. Not just for her, but for all of Marcus's victims who had carried the trauma of his manipulation for years. Any regrets? Jake asked gently. Sarah looked out at the mountains that had become her sanctuary, thinking about the life she'd built in Cedar Falls. Her work with the sheriff's department had expanded into a regional program, helping small communities improve their public safety communications. She had genuine friendships, meaningful work, and a partner who supported her choices rather than trying to control them. Only one, she said finally. I regret that it took so long for me to understand the difference between love and possession. Jake reached over and took her hand, not possessively, but with the gentle assurance of someone who knew she was free to pull away at any time. Sometimes the best lessons are the hardest learned. As the sun set over the mountains, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that rainy night when she'd been abandoned at the altar. What Marcus had intended as her destruction had become her liberation, teaching her that true strength lay not in never falling down, but in choosing to get back up and keep moving forward. She had found her voice, her home, and her future, not because someone else had designed them for her, but because she had claimed them for herself, and that made all the difference. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.